Well, hello there, ladies and gents. Great to see you again, and welcome back to Advance Your Wealth with Homer Smith. I'm Ryan Ruff, your host and moderator, and of course, I'll be joined by Homer. We're going to be jumping into another unique conversation. Today's specifically geared towards those business owners out there that we speak so much to on this show. Now, look, those successful entrepreneurs, those business owners out there, they're great at a lot of things. Planning and strategizing among the top of that list. But over time, as a business evolves and challenges come along your way and plans, let's say, evolve over time, plans can eventually evolve so much so that they become stale and ultimately less fruitful than maybe you had initially anticipated them to be. So, on the show today, Homer and I thought we would take a deep look into the concept of stress testing a business's plan to see whether or not it's still on track to deliver those intended results. And if you're a familiar listener of the show, you know this term of a stress test is something we've certainly covered in the past. But with regard, we're taking a different little angle at it today to discuss how it can be leveraged specifically for business planning purposes. So with that, let's go ahead and bring out Homer and get into the conversation today. Homer, good to see you. How you doing?
Hey Ryan, good to see you as always. Excited for the show today.
Yeah, this will be a good one. I mean, our audience is most certainly used to us here and talking about this idea of a stress test, but we're talking about it with regard to entrepreneurs and testing that business plan. So, why don't you start high level for us and share just how it can be relevant to the entrepreneur in today's day and age?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you're a successful entrepreneur, business owner, there's probably been a considerable amount of planning that you've done for the business with your team about maximizing the results for the business, and probably even a lot of planning around your personal financial world as well. But it's really important to regularly ask, are you certain and confident that the planning you've done up to that point is still on track to deliver the results that you really want? And that if you're even a little bit uncertain, tax laws change, the economic environment has changed, maybe uncertain. If you have any of that uncertainty creeping in, it's really probably time to do a stress test. And really, the stress testing process, as we've discussed before, is really designed to examine your business, from a different angle, perhaps, or your personal planning, to really put it through the paces and make sure that, again, those results that you're looking for, that the current structure is going to hold up under various scenarios. And that ultimately, if there are any issues, any gaps or opportunities, that you're able to identify them and address them.
Absolutely. Well, let's double click into that for just a moment. Talk to us about how a stress test is ultimately set up and structured and what an entrepreneur ultimately garners from that.
Yeah. So when we do stress tests, there's many factors that can go into them, but it's really important from our perspective in helping the successful entrepreneurs and business owners we work with, that it's really about results, about the outcomes they're looking to achieve. And what we find oftentimes, that most of the other advisors and legal experts out there, are really more focused on a specific product or a very specific strategy, and whether that's implemented correctly. And what we know is that, oftentimes if planning is done in a silo around a very particular product or strategy, and a big picture view hasn't been looked at, to is that very narrow solution really going to get them the ultimate outcome across their entire financial world, then they're really missing the bigger picture with that. And so for us, it's really, the bigger picture and the human element. Again, what we often find is that there's very technically brilliant solutions that we uncover in the stress testing process, that the solution itself, there's nothing wrong with it. But what they failed to ask are some of the questions around the personal goals of the family themselves. And that while the most efficient tax planning around the estate, um, well, it was effective, it actually eliminated some of the goals that the family wanted for their estate planning. And so while it was technically brilliant, it wasn't right for them. And so that's part of the process. It's not just the solution itself, but how does it really fit into the overall family goals?
Sure. And well, given all that, the human element coming into play, of course, the technical brilliance of this process, my next question might sound like a layup, but there's some validity behind it, and that is, should should a financial professional ultimately be the one conducting a stress test, or could it be any trusted professional, in a more generic sense? We've talked about that team of working with trusted professionals and whatnot, Homer, but would you recommend it should be a financial professional that conducts the stress test?
I think who conducts a stress test in terms of the professional, whether they're an attorney by trade, a financial professional, advisor by trade, CPA by trade. I don't think that matters as much as more their ability to really help the family look at the bigger picture. Now, what we found is that because of the demands on the legal expertise required to execute a very detailed and specific estate plan, or the expertise required to do taxes appropriately and really get into the weeds on taxes, that from a time standpoint and from a big picture standpoint, it often is the wealth manager that ends up being able to see that bigger picture. But I don't think it's required. And I think an important component of that is that it's, the tools available today don't necessarily separate advisors like they used to. So, with technology, with the knowledge that's out there, most attorneys have access to the same amazing trust planning that, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, there was a lot more narrow expertise that might have been around. And same thing with the financial space. There's complex solutions that, might have been more challenging to get access to that are easier and easier. So it's really not access to the tools. It's not that technical expertise necessarily. While that's important, again, it's really the ability to look at the bigger picture and identify, all of the areas of the financial life that need to be reviewed, and is everything working together as well as it should.
Sure. And Homer, you mentioned a few of the areas specifically already, but from a broader sense, let's talk about them. What areas do you see from an entrepreneur's business or even just their broader life as a whole that should be included within the stress testing and ultimately looked at?
Yes. So stress testing can be extremely narrow and focused. So, for example, it could be just really hyper focused on succession planning for a business owner and all the options, and have they reviewed the best options and picked the best path. But I would say more commonly, it takes a more comprehensive approach, because that particular need around succession planning often is going to affect a lot more areas of their life. And so we're looking at, again, all of the different components and all of the potential synergies or inefficiencies that might be there. What we found, though, is when it comes to stress testing for successful entrepreneurs and business owners, there's really a few areas that seem to always bubble to the top in terms of either, I would say, the most important for that family, so areas they're most concerned about, or areas that might have the most gaps or opportunities that need to be addressed. And those typically are, succession planning around the business, whether that is a long-term goal for them or a family business that may never be sold, but needs to figure out how is this going to operationally and financially, pass to the next generation. Another one, it's becoming more and more important, is around asset protection planning. And then finally, one that again, with, there's a lot of things in the news right now around the exemption, and maybe it's sunsetting and going to be much lower in the near future. So estate planning is becoming an area that we spend a lot of time on.
And well, another area, Homer, and it's one that you and I have had a lot of conversations with in our last few episodes. That entails within a stress test is this idea of exit planning. That big moment where a business owner's thinking about what comes next in life, selling their business. So, how might a stress test address exit planning specifically?
Yeah, so around succession planning, exit planning, there's a number of different areas. But let's say that business owner, that entrepreneur, actually does want to ultimately sell this business to an outside party. And I know we've used this stat on a number of occasions, but I think it's just so important for business owners to really focus on, is that for business owners who are ready to sell, and like they literally are raising their hand and they're saying, I want to sell my business. Unfortunately, only about 1 in 5 business owners are actually able to complete a transaction, who are actually ready to go, want to sell. And what's worse is, of those that complete the transaction, only about 12% of them say they were highly satisfied with the outcome that they got. So if you put those together, it's like 2 to 3% of business owners that start the process to exit their business end up with a highly satisfying outcome. And we believe the primary reasons for this is a lack of pre-sale corporate planning and a lack of pre-sale personal planning. So on the corporate side, it's really all about ensuring that your company is as attractive to a buyer as possible. Do you have your financials in order? How much of your revenue is from recurring sources? How dependent on the owner is the business? The more dependent on the owner, the less attractive that business is going to be to a buyer. How strong is the management team and their ability to deliver on future growth plans? Or how sticky are your clients and your employees, and how tied to your business are they? And the answer to these questions have a significant impact on the value of the business and the ability to complete a sale. So if you have any questions or any lack of confidence that you have the answers to those. Again, stress testing the corporate pre-sale planning is important. On the personal side, do you know how much the business needs to sell for to recreate your lifestyle after the sale? What I found, a lot of business owners don't go through that process and don't recognize, like, how many expenses are they able to run through the business, which makes it a very tax efficient from a cash flow structure. And they never really did the math on what that needs to look like on the other side. Have you taken fully into account the taxes that are going to be owed on the sale of the business? And have you done everything you can from a planning standpoint to reduce those as much as possible? And finally, have you considered ways that if your business, especially if you believe it could go up significantly in value by the time you sell it, have you considered free strategies that would allow most of that growth to occur outside of your estate, as well as the estate of your kids and future heirs, to dramatically reduce estate taxes in the future? And what we find is, oftentimes these aren't reviewed on a regular basis prior to going to market. And what it leads to is lower values when they do ultimately sell, if they do, less attractive terms and conditions. So a lot more of the value might go to an earnout, or failed transactions altogether. So it's really important that as soon as possible ahead of the exit, typically multiple years, if really in an ideal world, before a planned exit, that you go through the stress testing process, both on the pre-sale corporate and on the pre-sale personal planning.
I love it. Homer, another big area that we've talked about in the past, asset protection planning. Can't stress its importance enough, but where do a stress test and asset protection link up, and what could that show a business owner?
And there's a lot of reasons I think business owners and successful families should be considering a review of their asset protection plans. What we're finding is, the society today is getting more and more litigious, and more of our business owners and families are concerned about, unjust lawsuits. And so, what have you been doing about it? What have you done from a structuring of your business or your personal assets to try to make you a less attractive target? And, so some of the questions that you might ask, when was the last time you reviewed the indemnification language in your corporate documents? And, are they as strong as they should be? When was the last time you reviewed your commercial liability coverage? And your personal liability coverage? Like, do you have adequate protection so that if, whether an accident occurred or, again, somebody looking for an easy dollar to sue you for, do you have adequate protection in place to make that a less likely occurrence? And there's things like directors and officers insurance. Again, it's more and more common that employees and others are suing the business and now suing directors and officers of the business for issues that come up. And do you have good protection in place for that? And, also just how you structure your business in general. If you have multiple businesses, are you owning those multiple businesses like directly, or, do you have a holding company? If you have multiple real estate properties, are they each in their own LLC? Things like that that are critically important to review. So what I'd say is, on the theme or the idea also of business owners looking ultimately to do some sort of an exit down the road, making sure you're buttoned up from an asset protection standpoint to limit the risk of a lawsuit, or limit the risk of future liability for that buyer, could be the difference, again, of whether you ultimately complete the sale or not, or how challenging some of the terms and conditions might be related to that sale. So a stress test around the asset protection part is critical as well.
Sure. Homer, that third area you had mentioned earlier, which is a big one, is estate planning. How would a stress test be utilized here? What are some of the considerations business owners should be on the lookout for in this realm of planning?
As laws are changing all the time, around estate taxes and planning. And first is when was the last time your full estate plan was reviewed and compared ultimately to the outcomes that you were really looking for? And some of the questions that we spend a lot of time on with our business owners are you wanting to keep the business and then future wealth, if it's sold, in the line of the family? And are you trying to prevent the ability for assets to leak out to future divorces or future lawsuits, future creditor issues? So really, are we trying to keep things in the line of the family? Are there issues with kids or grandkids related to how well you think they might be at managing money, or might there be special needs or mental health or drug abuse issues that really would dictate very specific planning around those individuals? How important is it to minimize estate taxes down the road? Some of our families, I'd say most of our families, if they could, really would prefer to not have a bunch of their wealth that they generated and created over the years go to the government. Others, though, just don't want to go to the level of complexity and the planning it might take to do that, and are just more interested in how do we maintain liquidity so we can afford to pay for those taxes in that event. So at the end of the day, it's really what we found in reviewing both the estate plan and then how the business relates to that is that the outcome that they would get based on their current documents is a pretty drastic departure from the outcomes and results that they really are trying to create as a family. And just to give you a really simple example, that is kind of shocking, but we were reviewing documents for a pretty sizable family, and we noticed a typo in the documents, or at least we assumed it was a typo when we read it. But what we read was that at 12 years old, their child was to receive access to tens of millions of dollars of wealth. Well, the issue was that the 2 and the 1 were transposed. It was supposed to say 21. However, even as we went to the family and said, do you really think it's a good idea to give access to a 21-year-old to tens of millions of dollars at that point? It was, they agreed that it was probably actually even safer for the documents to give it to a 12-year-old. Because if a 12-year-old gets access to tens of millions of dollars, they're probably buying Xboxes and PlayStations for all their friends. But a 21-year-old could really do some damage with that kind of wealth. And so, again, without having done the stress test, that issue may not have been identified and could have led to some serious implications in their estate plan. So again, just as simple as even reading the documents is critical enough. But then even are those current documents really designed to get them the outcomes that they're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you shared that story. You've shared that one with me before, and it always leaves my jaw on the floor, that conversation. But it highlights the importance of estate planning and looking through it on a stress test. Homer, we've thrown a lot at our audience today. For those business owners out there that are probably pinching themselves a little bit and saying, I probably should get on this and lean into this myself. How can somebody decide if, or rather when to, ultimately go through a stress testing process in maybe one or multiple of those areas of the business that you mentioned today?
Yeah, I think just reviewing a few of the questions we may have already covered could help determine if now is a good time. So one of those might be, when is the last time that evaluate how you've structured the ownership of your company, with the thought process. Again, we talked a lot about in recent podcasts, as well as the eye of transferring this business down the road. And so how are you best protecting you, not only now, but in the future from lawsuits, which again could have a major impact on your ability to complete a transaction. When was the last time you reviewed the indemnification language in your corporate documents? When was the last time you reviewed the financial and legal steps that would be critical to take and important to take if important personnel or business partners suddenly died or became disabled, and the impact that would have on the business? And then finally, when was the last time you had an assessment of the value of the company, and any key issues that might be creating additional risk or making the business less attractive to a future buyer? If you're not sure of the answers, or it's been years since you reviewed any of the documents or issues related to some of those questions, then stress testing or doing an overall review is probably something that is pretty timely. So at the end of the day, again, it might be a single issue you're worried about, or it might be many areas that really should be addressed. Because what we often find is, as we dig into one, it leads to a lot of questions about others. And what we know from this process, if the full plan is reviewed, what the outcomes are is a lot more clarity on what you need to do to move forward. A lot more certainty that when the stress test is completed and the results are there, about what the plan needs to be to ultimately get there. And then a lot more confidence that you're going to get the outcomes that you want, and end up with a great business and a life of significance that you're looking for. So again, that's it's a big promise, but I'm very confident from the work that we've done with other families that that's the outcome that you tend to get from this process.
Sure. And Homer, if anybody out there is interested in reaching out to you and your team to maybe just pick your brain or go through the stress testing process with you guys, what would be the best way they could get in touch with your team?
Yeah, best solution is always to reach out, send an email to me. We'd be happy to set up a just an introductory call, just to ask some initial questions and see if a stress test might make sense for you to dive deeper on. And we'd love to have that conversation with you.
Awesome. Well, Homer, I appreciate you. I know you got clients to serve, so I'll let you get back to doing that. But looking forward to being back on the next one with you. Good stuff today.
All right, thanks, Ryan, as always.
Of course, of course. And hey, ladies and gents, look, we want to take a final moment, as we always do on the show, and thank you for stopping by, being with us, and learning with us today. If you enjoyed today's conversation, you took something away from it, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button on the platform that you did watch or listen to today's episode on. That way, you don't miss out on any conversations like these, where Homer and I jump into the wealth management considerations, the pressing questions and topics on many business owners or individuals' minds, because at the end of the day, we want to provide value to you and yours through some of these great conversations. Before Homer, I'm Ryan. We're going to go ahead and say so long now. But once again, we appreciate you being with us on Advance Your Wealth.